If f of x is equal to 2x plus 3, find the inverse function, which we write as f to the minus 1 of x. So we've got f of x is equal to 2x plus 3. Now what do we mean by the inverse function? Let's have a look at the following. If we start with x, the first thing we do to x with this function is we multiply it by 2, and out will come 2x. The next thing we do is that we add 3, and at the end we get 2x plus 3. What happens if we now work backwards? So if we start with x here, the first thing we do, an inverse implies do the opposite function, so the opposite of operation, sorry. So the opposite of adding 3 is to subtract 3. So if we do that, out will come x minus 3. And then the opposite of multiplying by 2 is to divide by 2. So we write that algebraically, x minus 3 all over 2, so divided by 2. Now this function here is called the inverse function. That will take anything that we come out of that back to its original function. Back to its original value. So the inverse function is f to the minus 1 of x, this is the notation that's used for inverse function, and it's always written in terms of x minus 3 divided by 2. So basically what I'm saying is, if we've got x and it comes up here, how do I get that back to what it started to? Well, whatever that is, I now make it x, and then I would subtract 3 and divide by 2, the opposite operations. So, but this is a bit of a not sort of a very efficient way of actually finding the inverse function. So it's better to use this, particularly when we've got a bit more complicated algebra. So it's easy to find by doing this. If this is our function, if we let y be equal to that, and then we rearrange this to make x the subject. So it's quite a simple bit of algebra here. We just subtract 3 from both sides. We're going to get y minus 3 is equal to 2x, and then we would divide by 2 both sides. So we're going to get y minus 3 over 2, is equal to x. But we don't write it in terms of y, we write the inverse function in terms of x. So just change all the y's to an x, and then change that x to f to the minus 1 of x, which is the notation for the inverse function. We get f to the minus 1 of x is equal to x minus 3 over 2. So this has been a video to introduce the idea of an inverse function. I hope you've understood, and I thank you very much for watching.